Welcome to Front Page Jerusalem, a weekly news magazine covering events in Israel.
It's news from the Holy Land without censorship.
You're listening to Front Page Jerusalem.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Front Page Jerusalem, the voice of Israel to the world, produced by the International Christian Embassy, Jerusalem. I'm Earl Cox.
I'm Ben Kinchlow.
And I'm David Parsons in Jerusalem.
On this week's program, we're focusing on the many complex challenges which Israel currently faces from radical Muslim militias. Is ISIS becoming a bigger danger to Israel than Hamas or Hezbollah? Well, here to help us understand the difficulties of the radical Islamist threat to Israel is former Israeli Air Force pilot Lieutenant Colonel Reuven Ben Shalom. He is a security analyst who recently participated in a major policy conference at the Interdisciplinary Center in Herzliya and came away with some fresh insights and information from his peers in the field of counter-terrorism. Here's front page reporter Aaron Heck with this week's guest.
Well, hello, Colonel Ben Shalom. It's great to have you back on Front Page Jerusalem.
Oh, thank you. Good to be here.
All right, you recently attended this counter-terrorism conference at the Interdisciplinary Center in Herzliya. Can you tell me what some of the delegates talked about and share your own thoughts on the threat to Israel from the Islamic State, this terror militia which has taken over much of eastern Syria and northern Iraq and is threatening to take over the whole world?
Last week was about understanding the threat. ISIS was the hot topic there. But if I got to tell you, what the outcome for me was from this, that ISIS is not the number one threat in the Middle East, and certainly not the number one threat to Israel. ISIS is just a component. Number one threat for Israel is still Iran, and Iran's involvement in terrorism throughout the Middle East, mainly their forward operating base, which is Hezbollah in Lebanon.
One of the things that has come up quite a few times in the commentary on ISIS, and primarily the U.S.-led response to it, is that this is not only a military struggle, it's also a political struggle, it's an economic struggle, but primarily it's an ideological struggle, and that the U.S., particularly President Barack Obama, has not really laid out a vision for how the West and Israel can fight on the ideological plane. Like someone said in a movie once, the way to fight an idea is with another idea. And I don't see much out there of the fight against ISIS and, for that matter, other forms of militant Islam like Hezbollah and Hamas. I don't see much effort in the West towards fighting on the ideological plane. Can you talk about that?
This was also discussed during the conference, even though, of course, it was a bit embarrassing when we have the U.S. president saying, I don't have a strategy yet, and that got a lot of media coverage. But we do see now a campaign to put together an international coalition to counter ISIS or ISIL. And I think that's the right track. So I think the track now is joining forces together in understanding and defeating. And I think they used very strong terminology. The things that they said, that was not soft language. They were talking about going out there and killing them. And I agree with that. As far as countering the ideology, this is very complex. Of course, we do not do enough. Notice that there's a very interesting phenomenon here where we have ISIS uprising in even the U.S. and Europe. If somebody gets up and raises this black flag and says, I am now ISIS, that's how it starts. That's how it begins. So what do? Do you start going into mosques in Europe and talking about the education and the indoctrination there? Very complicated, very complex, especially with all the democratic ideas of, and freedoms that come with democracy. So yes, I see some confusion. It's not as easy as warfare, where you know where the bad guy is and you go and kill him. You're talking about countering an emerging ideology.
Okay, so since you spoke a little bit about what the conference talked about, understanding the enemy, can you, for our listeners, give an outline of what is ISIS's ideology? What is their driving motivation?
Well, it's very interesting because, always when you examine the Middle East and the problems here, you see that sometimes it's very difficult to understand the problem, and sometimes it's easy to understand the problem but very difficult to solve. So I think the basic problem that these people got up and decided that they want to establish a Muslim caliphate. So the objective is very clear. They want to establish a caliphate throughout this region and then throughout the world. The threat to us or to the world is absolutely clear. So that's easy. Now, the difficult part, as we said, is how to counter it. The conference had very good speakers, and they addressed this issue from different angles. But the most interesting angle for me was to figure out what their main tactic was. And their main tactic, I think, is instilling fear. What ISIS want is they want us to be afraid. That's why they use these techniques of beheadings and posting the videos online. They want us to shake with fear. So I would say that the number one lesson learned from the conference last week is they want me to be afraid, so the first thing is I'm not going to be afraid. We've got to be very careful how we, in a way, assist them with their PR mechanism. And the first thing is that we're not afraid. Now look at the Israeli record in countering terrorism. Throughout the campaigns we had in Lebanon and recently in Gaza, the other side are wearing masks on their faces and speaking loudly and all this incitement that's intended to instill maybe fear on our side. Look at the videos they post. We're going to burn you. We're going to attack you. And you see that the Israeli mentality is, look, guys, you're not scaring us. And our IDF soldiers are eager even to go out and fight you. And then what do? We go out and we fight them on the ground and we beat them. That's what happened in Gaza. That's what happened in Lebanon. Bottom line, on the battlefield, soldier against terrorist, Israeli IDF soldiers always won every battle. We, Israel, the West, should put at the front line of our counter-terrorism strategy, and that is, first, we are not afraid. Now, if you take it one level down, is there a great concern here? Of course it's not pleasant. Of course there is a concern to the places and people that they are now attacking. But do ISIS pose an existential threat to Israel? Most certainly not. It's something, of course, we have to, in a combined manner, fight and oppose. The main thing is our understanding of the threat and our perception of the threat and what it means to us, and then how we get together and counter it.
Well, let me ask you about something that some people say might end up being an existential threat to Israel that comes out of this situation, and that is that the U.S. and NATO, in its desire to enlist Sunni Arab governments to this coalition to fight against ISIS, might come to Israel and say, you need to help us enlist the support of these Sunni Arab governments by making concessions to the Palestinians, which we Israelis know would be dangerous to our security, such as pulling out of the West Bank and abandoning the Jordan Valley and things like that. What do you think might we do to counter that potential existential threat?
Well, what we see here is like a multi-dimensional equation, and it's not easy. There's not like one component where you put something into place and you understand the equation. It's very complicated, and my recommendation is try to simplify this. And I would not take the current fight on ISIS, the building of the international coalition now, I would not take that all the way to the Palestinian arena. And by the way, I don't see that happening yet. I don't see that happening tomorrow. The example that you gave, like someone will come and say, okay, you pull out of the West Bank in order to support the fight on ISIS. I don't see that directly happening. But I do see a very interesting, really complex challenge here is what happens with entities, like let's take the worst, Iran, where Iran also has interest in countering ISIS. So does that mean that because they want to counter ISIS, then we, the West or the United States, has to now partner up with Iran or appease Iran in any way in order to get the worst enemy, which is ISIS? So first, let's not forget who the worst enemy is, and I'll say again that is Iran. And when you talk about existential threats, I would say that is only Iran and what Iran is trying now to achieve. And second, I will say that is something that we always have to be on the lookout for. We have to warn our partners and friends not to get caught up in this. And I listen very closely to the United States, to the administration, what they say now, and I'm happy with what I hear. That means I do not hear from them, yes, we're going to let go of the Iranians because it's good for us now that they oppose ISIS. I hear them saying very clearly that the emerging threat of a nuclear Iran is something that's number one on our list. We're never going to let that happen. Even the talks that are going on now, they say we're not going to let go on our determination to avoid Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons. So, yes, it's complex. Still, we have to remember the map of threats, remember who's number one on that threat, and not let go of one because of the other.
Well, I'm glad you brought up Iran because the final question I'm going to ask you about is the effect on the threat that Iran, and by extension the Lebanese Shiite terror militia Hezbollah, which Iran supports, the effect that this fight against ISIS has on the threat that they pose to Israel. I mean, we've heard that Hezbollah has been fighting in Syria for the last 2 years and has sustained a very large number of casualties, taken a tremendous amount of damage, but they've also gained a lot of battlefield experience. They've also gained some confidence from this fight against rebel factions, and now they're fully engaged fighting ISIS. And ISIS, of course, and before them it was the Al-Qaeda franchise in Syria. Jabhat al-Nusra is threatening, when we're done finishing off Assad, we're going to go into Lebanon and finish off Hezbollah. And, of course, Israel and probably the United States and NATO are sitting here watching this saying, well, they're killing each other off. It's a good thing, but it's more complicated than that, isn't it? The threat that Iran and, by extension, Hezbollah poses to Israel, is it getting worse or is it getting better because of this fight against ISIS?
You know, one could argue that the internal civil war in Syria is a good thing for us because they're involved with internal clashes and leaving us alone. I will never say that, and I don't think that, and I feel for the Syrian people, and I think it's terrible what's going on there. Again, when we come back to the threats to Israel and Hezbollah, and bottom line now, who is weakened and who is stronger, I will say that I believe Hezbollah still poses a serious threat to Israel. Again, let's be careful with what we say. Not an existential threat to Israel, but I will say that Hezbollah, which is the long arm of Iran, will make the next war with Israel very difficult. We're going to see more rockets. We're going to see new tactics that they bring in after the experience that they gain. We got to remember that fighting forces that are engaged in war, they do accumulate valuable knowledge and lessons learned. And when you have a learning organizations like Hezbollah and other terror organizations in the region, they are very good at learning. So I think Hezbollah, we're going to find them stronger, and we're going to find them with more weapons. The question, of course, is when will they trigger this? And this is, again, a complex question because I don't think it's a matter of Hezbollah or even their leader. It's a matter of Iran. And when Iran is going to feel that it suits their interest at that point in time to launch Hezbollah towards us, what will it be? Will it be the international community coming down hard on their nuclear program when the talks fail or something like that, and they're going to want to divert the world towards another little clash with Hezbollah? Could be. It could be anything else. But I think that when that time comes, that campaign will be difficult for us. It will be challenging. Of course, we'll prevail like we always do because we don't have a choice. And also, I trust my friends in the IDF that are, as we speak, learning very carefully the situation, again, preparing the next campaign to have our forces strong and ready, besides being very highly motivated, and as I said before, definitely not afraid of Hezbollah, ready to counter whatever they have, thwart every surprise they may think they're preparing for us, and bottom line, show them again that it's not worth it to attack us, because at the end of the day, or after that campaign, they're going to be beaten, they're going to again be down on their knees, and they're going to need years and years to rebuild their force. And who are going to be the great sufferers from this? Of course, the people of Lebanon, the Lebanese country, which is a tragedy, because that's what Hezbollah is doing to them.
Okay, well, that's all the time we have. Thank you very much, Colonel Ben Shalom, and God bless you.
Thank you very much.
Well, that's all for now, folks. Thanks to all of our listeners for joining us on today's program. And don't forget to support this station, because it supports Israel.
And before we leave you, let me invite you to join us again next week right here as we bring you the latest news out of Israel and the Middle East.
Now, on behalf of the entire Front Page Jerusalem staff, I'm Earl Cox, reminding you that because God loves Israel, I do too.